Robert Lee is a recognized pioneer in the industrial security incident response and threat intelligence community. He gained his start in security as a U.S. Air Force cyber warfare operations officer tasked to the National Security Agency, where he built a first-of-its-kind mission identifying and analyzing national threats to industrial infrastructure. He went on to build the industrial community's first dedicated monitoring and incident response class at the SANS Institute and the industry-recognized cyber threat intelligence course. In 2016, Forbes named Robert to its 30 under 30 list as one of the brightest entrepreneurs, breakout talents, and change agents in enterprise technology. He is a business leader, but also a technical practitioner. Robert helped lead the investigation into the 2015 cyber attack on Ukraine's power grid. He and his team at Dragos helped identify and analyze the crash override malware that attacked Ukraine's grid in 2016 and the Trisis malware deployed against an industrial safety system in the Middle East in 2017. Robert is routinely sought after for his advice and input into industrial threat detection and response. Plus, he's got a killer beard, and we know that people with beards are pretty awesome people. So, let's welcome to the stage Robert Lee.
You're speaking better, man. Thanks. All right, thank you. So look, I really appreciate being here. I get the pleasure of going around a lot of conferences, but this one's a little more important to me because I'm from Cullman, Alabama, and spent a lot of time here in Huntsville. This is the first time I've actually ever come back to give a talk in Huntsville. So I guess you gotta leave, go far away, travel the world, and then you land right back in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't think I need a rocket. I need a gallon of sweet tea, but we'll negotiate at the end. Look, from the world of industrial, I'm gonna convey to you a couple key points today. And really, it's a super easy job to be a keynote. For those of you that haven't done it before, I'll give you the tips. You basically show up late, you run over your time, you pontificate wildly about big topics that nobody's really focused on, and at the end, everybody applauds and we have a good time. So that's effectively all of a keynote is. That's the first half of the presentation I'll give you. The second half, I'm actually gonna leave you with, here's some things I want you to go do. So I'm gonna break the keynote rules a little bit. But some of you are those technical practitioners, and I think it'd be useful to have an understanding of how I want you to apply what we talked about. So right off the bat, industrial control systems, industrial world, what is that? A couple years ago, even, folks would have just pegged that as electric utilities, maybe oil and gas. The military realized, okay, well, we have a lot of control systems on aerial vehicles and ships, a lot of Siemens controllers on Navy ships. But now the world is realizing that everything is industrial. If you're not a bank or an insurance company, you are probably an industrial company in this space. And although that might seem obvious now, it really is different than for about 5 years ago. So even when I was starting my company and went and took venture capital, all the venture capitalists out in California looking at the markets asked that question: industrial control systems? What is, that's not even a real thing. Like that's just, we're gonna do AI and blockchain. I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. Well, I'm gonna go keep the lights on. But there's a balance there. What I'll note on industrial to kick this thing off is our world is different on the industrial control system side. We heard a lot of cool things from Bobby about what's coming in the future, especially what's happening in software. The fact that you might push out software only for a couple days, not in industrial. We're gonna live with that stuff for 20 plus years. We are not behind. And that's the first real big thing I want you to leave with, is I always hear from folks, industrial control systems, oh, they don't even have good passwords. They're 10 years behind IT security. That's just not true. Actually, we have pretty good security in a lot of our different industrial environments. It's not always been cybersecurity, but a dedication to safety and reliability have given us a lot of natural security in those environments. Sure, we have to do more, but just the requirements are different. And so when you think of industrial control systems, the easiest way to think about a lot of it is just think of everything in IT plus physics. So there's going to be your domain controllers. Yeah, we've got Windows systems, Linux, sure, we've got all that. But there's embedded systems. Some of them are, some of them aren't. That's not the point. The point is that it's controlling and impacting and sensing and actuating something in the real world. Years ago, there was a gas pipeline explosion in California. And on that gas pipeline explosion, what effectively happened was a series of unfortunate events. So there was failures from the piping perspective. It wasn't pressure rated to the level it needed to be, some bad maintenance taking place. But the final event was a system administrator over in the control center, the place they can actually monitor these gas pipelines, did a database join. Took two databases, joined them together. Completely routine action in any IT sort of enterprise. From that environment, doing that join, it lagged the resources on the computer. Because one of those computers was a human-machine interface, it was the way to actually see what was going on in the physical process, the operators didn't get the alarms that the overpressurizing event was taking place. They would have been able to take action because of that. Because they didn't get those alarms and didn't take the right action, the pipeline had a rupture event and people died. And so when we talk about industrial security, not to start the conference off really morbid, but the first thing that I want you to keep in mind is nobody's died in IT from joining a database. They have in ICS. So the world of what we are doing and why we are doing it and the requirements and the mission on the industrial side of the house is wildly different. And some of the best practices we see in IT security just don't apply in industrial at all. So my presentation today, and really what I want to get into, is this industrial threat landscape. I want to give you an understanding, walking away with this room, of what we've seen from threats in the industrial space. I want you to understand our challenges, and hopefully, again, I'll leave you with some ability to apply it, especially for those of you that are actually working in the security space on industrial, or if you want to join us. So the very first slide here is really trying to hammer home two key points. Number one is we simply do not have enough people. On the IT kind of cybersecurity challenge, we talk about how there's a ton of unfillable positions and a lack of folks. Like, that's important to understand. On the industrial side, it's an order of magnitude in difference. The number of people who actually understand industrial control systems and physical process, as well as cybersecurity, is been talked about to about 1,000 professionals in the United States. I figure we're on the upswing, but it's orders of magnitude different than what we're talking about in IT security. What does that really mean? It means that as we talk about standards and frameworks and best practices and regulations, that a lot of times the committees that we're putting together aren't practitioners. They're not even necessarily the ones that really understand the security implications of what they're talking about. And that's not to put them down in any way. That's just an understanding that where we are as a field in industrial security is different. And it means we need to be a little bit more flexible, because things are going to change, and we're going to learn, and we're going to learn more over time and very quickly, and we're going to have to apply that. It means that the consultant that comes in to brief the board of directors at an oil company might not be the expert that they're looking for to actually be able to advise them correctly. I did 14 plus board meetings last year at your major energy companies, and that was a routine expression from the board, is that they had people that came in before and scolded them off not having passwords on the gas turbine controller. Right? That's not the thing that you need to be focused on. The second big key event here, the big takeaway from this slide, is every single year the Department of Homeland Security would put out information about the attacks they saw. Now we will use that word attacks in kind of quotes. It means something a little bit different to everybody, but incidents that they were looking for. And every year they'd come out and say, oh, around 200, 300 or so incidents that we're seeing in the field. And of course, that's not a full picture. It's only really the people that are willing to even report to the DHS on that. But the metric that the news media never grabbed onto, the one that never became a focus point in anybody's presentations, that I thought was the most interesting and most important one, was that every single year across those reports for about the last 7 years. So they've been out for 7 years, every single one of them. The number one attack vector, the way the industrial attack happened, number one is unknown. Number two is spear phishing. And every security professional in here is going, yeah, spear phishing. No. We don't have email servers in the SCADA and DCS environment controlling the equipment, okay? What the slide is actually saying, what the metrics were actually telling people was not do spear phishing training and that's our number one thing. What the metrics were actually saying is we haven't got the first clue of what's happening in those environments. because we don't have the visibility into them. We don't have security professionals that even have authority in their companies to go look at them, sometimes with good reasons. Sometimes security comes in and does some things that are maybe not the best. I've responded to more power outages because a sysadmin or a penetration tester has done something stupid than Russia, okay? So there's a balance there. But what it's really saying is if we see anything, it's because IT caught it. Otherwise, we're flying blind. And if we're flying blind, then we're probably not taking lessons learned and insights and turning it into meaningful best practice or turning it into recommendations to these companies. One of the ways we talk about ICS attacks and really try to understand that they are different is the ICS cyber kill chain. So Mike Asante and I wrote this years ago, and we basically said, look, that Lockheed Martin kill chain, the one that Mike Cloppert and folks put together, fantastic model. The whole point of the model was just to say, cyber attacks are not everything that you've heard. They're not the happens in seconds, cyber speed. Like I used to be in the military, I remember all those stupid posters. Cyber speed of attacks, no, it doesn't happen that way. There's human operators on the other side of the keyboard that are going after you, and they've got series of steps they go through. There's your adversary isn't the Russian state. Your adversary is like 5 guys on a team in Russia that might be between the ages of 18 and 32. Government's their first job. They've got PowerPoint, management, and HR. You can do this, okay? Like defense is doable was really the big output of the kill chain kind of view. Where it stopped was, hey, action. At the end, we can do action, and in an IT environment, that makes sense. I break in, I get root privileges on a domain controller, game over. Fine. But in ICS, I can give a guy or gal access to the human-machine interface. I can sit them down in front of the terminal and say, okay, make the lights blink, and they will still have trouble doing that. I remember one time, one of my favorite stories is I used to live in Texas, so the military moved me around a bunch. I lived in Texas, and I lived near a gas pipeline. And so I went to that gas pipeline operator and said, look, if you ever need anything, call me. Free instant response. I'll be there. I just want to keep living. So anything that happens to that gas pipeline, give me a call, I'll help you out. So I get the phone call one day, gas pipeline operator, Rob, we need you to come in. I'm like, oh, crap. Grab the jump bag, I'm ready to go. I tell my wife to leave. All the right things. I get there and I'm like, what do you need? Like, hey, we're having an annual pen test. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do like penetration services for you. That's not what I'm interested in. They're like, no, we've already got somebody. I'm like, okay, what do you need me for? We don't have a lot of security staff. Can you just follow this guy around and make sure he doesn't do anything stupid? I'm like, great, sure. No, this is right where I want to be in my career. No problem. So I follow this kid around. He's doing a good job. He actually does things fairly well, very passive instead of all the active crap that you'd expect in like IT environments. He's being respectful of the environment. He does do some active penetration on a human-machine interface that was within scope. They were allowed to do it. Good to go, no problem. So he goes off, writes his report, comes back a couple weeks later. We sit down. I go to the outbrief. Why not at this point? We've got the chief of engineering, got the chief of information security, and then you've got their direct reports. So kind of like what little security team they had as well as the engineering staff. And the pen tester is giving this briefing. It's like, wow, and I found this, and here's these vulnerabilities, and what about that? And the engineers started to get on it. They really liked it. They thought it was cool. They were learning about their environment. They were learning about their systems. They really enjoyed it. And so I know you'll never believe this, but that pen tester started to get arrogant. Completely off color, I understand. And that pen tester was like, wow, well, if you like that, let me show you this. Flips around the laptop, and he's still got remote access to that human-machine interface. He says, yeah, you guys really need to take security seriously, because if I click this button here, boom. We're all just kind of like looking at the guy at this point. And without missing a beat, the head of engineering goes, push it. And we're like, no, hold on. Like, we're in the building. Let's not be stupid here. And the person that's leading security basically argues with him about insurance and liability and all this other stuff. The engineering head says, too bad, push it. And I don't know if you've ever been in an operations company, but security is the digital janitors we hire to clean up messes. They're not the boss, which means the head of engineering is the boss. And he said, push it. So guess what the pen tester had to do? Very reluctantly, like almost like, squeamish, push the button without missing a beat. The chief of engineering goes, boom! Scared the crap out of this guy. Nothing happened. And what the chief of engineering then told him was some of the most talking down to a person I've ever heard, which was, well, Sonny, What your in-map scans didn't show you is that we have hardware fail-safes and passive safety systems that you can push that button all day long, but all it's doing is letting off a little hot air. And I'm like, ooh. The story there, of course, goes to that whole kill chain model. That access piece rightfully scares enterprise security. If you get through the full kill chain view of down to action on what really is stage one, which is a mimic of the Lockheed kill chain, that doesn't mean anything in ICS yet. Like, access is just stage one. So in the world of industrial, we have that stage two. And that's now the need for the adversary to go learn and develop, not only necessarily capabilities, but more often than not, just knowledge of how to interact with that system, how to understand the passive mechanisms that might be safety, whether it be reliability or just protection schemas. They've got to understand what the system can and can't do, and then they're ultimately going to have some level of testing before they just go like, click, let's see if this works. And of course, then you have your final action. Your final action might be an explosion. Your final action might be the disabling of a safety system with a follow-on attack. It might be one step for a more complex attack, especially if you're talking about physical destruction, disruption, or some level of degradation. What that really means, and why I'm spending so much time on this slide, what this really means is actually something really empowering. As a defender, you have probably heard at some point in your career, well, the adversaries only have to get one thing right, and defenders have to protect it all. That's stupid. That's a story that defenders tell themselves having never been on the offense. For a portion of my career, I was on the offense, not pen testing, but for the US government. And no point in my day was it like, I got in, good, pop bottles, or hey, let's do fancy things so that we get bonus points for looking good in the conspiracy report. Like, that's not what you get measured on. That's not how you actually achieve operations. Adversaries are going through those steps. They actually have to get everything right. If a defender detects anything they're doing, then the defender can pivot the investigation and wins. It's actually a completely inverse model. What the two-stage kind of kill chain view is telling us about industrial security is that in the world of industrial, the things we care about most, the scenarios that are most impactful that we're concerned with, are way harder to do and take way more time to do than anything in enterprise security, which means we have more time and opportunities to do defense. We can have a better view of protective, detective, and responsive controls. So we're going to come back to that kill chain view across some of these attacks. So again, probably the biggest message I'd leave anybody is that defense is doable, especially when it comes to industrial. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not inherited. You don't just get it because you have a firewall. It's doable. And the reality is, every time I see news or anyone else talk about ICS, it's always in, well, they're going to dump chlorine into the water, and they're going to kill a bunch of people. Okay, well, not saying it's not possible and we shouldn't do defense, but what actually happens at a water utility that's doing water sort of to the public instead of maybe wastewater, they're testing it. So they have all their systems, and you're right, there's physical controls and digital controls that maybe an adversary can manipulate. And then literally every hour, they're testing the water to make sure that it's within a safety control. So could you hurt people through a water utility? Yes. Could you get to the scenarios that you've probably seen on TV? Not a chance. Can you take down an electric substation on maybe in DC? Yeah, you could. Could you take down the Eastern Interconnect for a day? It's possible. Like, we've thought about how different adversaries could do that. Could they do it for a week? If a couple of the big players really put a large focus in it, yeah, I guess it's possible. Like, you could really do that. Could you do it for over a month? We can't even determine like how that's achievable. Now, we don't want to be pretending that the adversary is limited by our imagination, but it's completely on the upper limits of that doesn't make sense. So we hear about cascading power grid failures across the United States. Most of that's just hype. And I would bet if you've done any research in ICS, you've probably fell prey to the hype. Gas pipeline. Anybody remember the story? The Turkey BTC pipeline. The Russians did a cyber attack on a gas pipeline and caused a physical explosion back in 2007 timeframe. Anybody ever hear that story? Yeah, we got a couple people raising their hands. Thanks for playing along, no problem. All right, good. I hope you know that that was completely made up by Bloomberg. Didn't happen. Literally did not happen. They claimed the NSA was their source. I've been cleared to be able to say this, I was leading that mission at the NSA at the time. They claimed, NSA told us that this actually happened. We can't talk about it because it's classified and the source is protecting. Nope, literally led that mission. We have no idea what event you're talking about. It's just made up stuff. Some of these attacks are real. We're going to talk about real ones, and they're pretty scary. When they happen, they're impactful. The water utility in Illinois, right after 2010, 2011 timeframe, national headlines by multiple outlets ran that there was a cyber attack by Russia on a water utility. Everyone freaked out. What was it? It was a pump that had decayed, and it was completely appropriate for normal operations for that pump to fail. And there was a contractor who was on vacation in St. Petersburg that dialed in to try to fix it. And so when the FBI and DHS had came in, no offense to them on this one, but when they came in, they saw Russian IP address, pump failure, therefore cyber attack. And it was completely wrong. The Burlington Electric one. I don't know if you remember in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post about 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, headlines on Russia's attacking the cyber attacking the US grid, and 2 sitting senators came out and condemned Russia and said, like, how dare you do this? And this is potentially an act of war. Now, they don't get to make that decision, thankfully, but they were freaking out and publicly taking a very aggressive stance. What was the reality? It was bad indicators passed out by the DHS. Burlington Electric, it's not always the DHS, they do good work too, but the Burlington Electric up in Vermont ran the indicators, ran the IP addresses against their network traffic, found one, called the DHS, and somebody leaked it to the press that, oh, this is a validation that Russia's attacking our grid. Part of the problem is one of those stupid IP addresses was a Yahoo email server. It should have never been included in there, but they went to Yahoo that day, and now 2 US senators were calling for war with Russia. We need to dial down the hype a little, okay? Real attacks happen, but people are way too focused on, oh my God, we're gonna die, and not, well, actually a 30-minute power outage in DC would be just as impactful to the electorate and psychological impact from the populace. Ted Koppel's book. I like Ted Koppel, he's a nice guy. I did a panel with him, he's a good old guy. His book is totally full of crap on what could possibly happen in an electric grid. The lights out, informing our policymakers of here's what can happen. Not real, it's not grounded in truth. All right, cool, so let's take a look at some of these stories. What is the reality? The reality is we have never had visibility pre-2014 into ICS cyber attacks. Any that had ever been discussed, detected, or even hinted at were completely put off to the side, usually under massive NDAs with companies that want to talk about it, but largely they just didn't know. Plenty of times we've had maintenance events where something has happened and we just ruled it to be a maintenance event because we didn't have the data or forensics or collection or visibility or anything to even get to a better answer. So pre-2014, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of exploration in the US around cyber threat intelligence. And the NSA had just spun up its NSA Threat Operations Center in early 2000s, and was really driving a lot of insight into this. And people were leaving and going to private sector companies and doing some really sweet stuff. Then we started to get the McAfees of the world, and Dimitri, who's now over at CrowdStrike, following campaigns like Night Dragon. Then we had Operation Aurora. Then eventually Kevin Mandia took stage at RSA, and this was a big moment in the security community. And Kevin Mandia published a report called APT1. You may have read it before. If not, I'd highly encourage you to go take a look at it. It was the first comprehensive expose into the Chinese state targeting and stealing intellectual property from massive amounts of American companies. And what I mean by first comprehensive is it wasn't just here's attacks, those have been going on. It was here's who the operators are, these are the military units, this is military on civilian companies. And that was a wake-up moment for some folks. Vanity Fair even had a big cover piece on it. So it went outside the security community to the larger public. Nowhere in that report was there any mention of ICS or industrial or OT or anything like that. I know Kevin, he did a panel with me, and I asked him, like, hey Kevin, I think there was a lot of ICS stuff related to that. Why didn't you guys talk about it? Oh yeah, well, when we would respond to Dow Chemical was one of the companies they responded to that was public. When we responded to Dow Chemical, we only had access and authority and skill sets to do stuff on the enterprise side. So there was some connections down into the weird, like, plants or whatever they have, but we didn't have permission or experience to go into them. Like, Our history on ICS cyber attacks is plagued by a lack of visibility into some of those earlier cases. But around 2014, things changed. 2014, we as a community started getting a heck of a lot better on it. Practitioners are coming out from the various places that were actually doing this work and putting together a bunch of insight and reporting publicly on ICS attacks. But a big moment in 2014 was that there was a cyber attack on a German steel facility. And after analysis would look that it was actually potentially more of intellectual property theft that went wrong. But at the time, it looked like it was an intentional cyber attack. And it caused the uncontrollable event of a blast furnace that led to massive physical destruction across that steel facility. So people could have died and been hurt. Luckily, they evacuated on time. But that was a, whoa, this isn't just the US and Israel beating up on Iran stuff. This is like our folks, our allies, like our infrastructure very visibly getting attacked. This is weird. Then it started to accelerate. 2015 Ukraine, we'll talk about that in a second. 2016 Ukraine. Trisis in Saudi Arabia. We're now starting to see not just one event every 5 or 6 years, we're seeing multiple events a year. And again, the hype would say, oh my God, we're all gonna die. I'm trying to dial that down. I wanna say it's doable, all right, we can get there. But yeah, it's getting more aggressive. But what it's gonna look like is it's getting untamable. As we get more visibility into these environments, we're gonna see stuff that's actually been there for a while, that had been going on for quite some time. So it's gonna look like a hockey stick of, oh my gosh, look at all these crazy industrial attacks that have never happened before. No, they've largely been happening, but because the industrial community is getting better and smarter and looking into their networks and doing really cool security stuff, we're gonna find more. So the takeaway here is, yes, the threats are becoming more numerous and more aggressive, but we're also just seeing more than we've ever seen before. And why this is a big takeaway for really anybody that's not the practitioner level, but looking at security governance, strategy, policies, frameworks, et cetera, is that all of our regulations, frameworks, best practices, et cetera, were made pre-2014. So everything for the industrial community was pre-2014. NERC-CIP, IEC 62443, like name it, it was going on and being built pre-2014. Over the last 5 years, we've gained more insights into what the threats are actually doing than ever before. We need to take that insight, that intelligence, and drive it back into our frameworks and regulations and policies and best practices. Otherwise, we'll be running around updating passwords on controllers when the adversaries aren't even doing that level of attack. So we'll have a mismatch in how we're trying to reduce that risk. Cool, so let's get into story time. So I have it broken down. I'll do two things here. There's two audiences, especially in a keynote, we gotta balance audiences. Left-hand side, more technical practitioner level, if you're interested, a step-by-step, blow-by-blow kind of take. Story time for everybody that's like me and prefers stories. Here's what happened. Ukraine 2015. I had just left the government in August, and I thought, I'm done with ICS. Like, I love it, it's great, but I'm just gonna be teaching at SANS. I don't want to be flying around the world and doing response anytime soon. I decided that I'll go ahead and get married. Had my fiance for a while, said let's get married. I'm out of the military, I feel like I can actually settle down now. December 24th, my wedding was December 25th. December 24th, I get a phone call. Rob, Ukraine's power's down. I'm like, I don't care, click. Like, not my problem. This evening of 24th, I get a phone call. Rob, they're blaming the Russians. Of course they are. Click, like it could be squirrels. The morning of the 25th, the morning of my wedding, I get a call from some counterparts on the Ukrainian intelligence side saying, actually, it looks like this could be real and we are not prepared for this. I was like, oh, all right, let me wrap up this wedding thing. So I got to get involved immediately after the wedding. My wife is still with me. We have a kid, happy story, don't get me wrong. She didn't murder me like she probably should have. And when we looked at the Ukrainian attack, and we formed sort of a little tiger team to go help there, what was really interesting is all of the IT stuff and best practices that we've been saying for years don't really align to industrial started to become tangible. The phase one or stage one of that kill chain event was all the normal IT crap. Adversary had a phishing email, they had a Word document, you clicked on it, macros, malware, blah, 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 blah. Normal stuff. The defenders focused on the malware, not the human threat, which was an issue. Like, one of the power companies actually found the malware, Black Energy 3, and cleaned it up. But the adversary had actually moved away from using the malware and was using legitimate credentials and accounts inside the environment, sort of living off the land. But there was three energy companies that got targeted, and the entire networks were owned within 3 days. It was very quick. And they were done. And once they were done owning those networks, they were moving away from those networks. What they were looking for was the connections into the operation side of the house, where they were actually using distribution management systems to control the flow of power. There, they spent 6 months learning the industrial environment, developing knowledge about it, understanding how it was connected, figuring out how they might deny power, how they might delay restoration, figuring out their plan. Because it's not like you just pop open a power grid in your basement and go practice hacking away. The real world is going to be different site to site. Most of these environments are very, very heterogeneous. One substation is different than another substation. So when it came time for the final attack, what essentially happened is they put all their pieces together and they said, cool, we're going to remote desktop out the human machine interfaces. We're going to click on the circuit breakers to open up the circuit breakers to de-energize the substations. From there, the power would go out around the different regions of Ukraine, but the operators would still have power in their building because of the backup power supply. But the adversary had already reprogrammed the backup power supply to keep up, but then drop power and then reboot all the systems and come back up, and then 10 minutes later drop everything again, and then drop its interface card so that you couldn't remotely connect to it anymore. Why the reboot? Because the adversary had pre-positioned malware across around 700 plus systems across these 3 companies that would then delete the systems and all the information after the reboot. So if you're an operator, you're looking, your mouse starts moving on your screen, you're like, that's super weird. They literally thought it was IT, by the way. They're like, why is IT coming in? Not IT. Computer systems go down, power starts going down, you still have your computer systems, you start going to your disaster recovery plan, all of a sudden your computer systems go down, come back up, everything deletes itself. Then they decided, well, maybe we'll go back to getting some new computer systems online and try to reach out to the field. But the adversary had actually found the connections to the field, which would be serial to Ethernet converters, little boxes to communicate out to the field substations. And they'd already crafted specific malicious firmware to upload to every single one of those, acting like a blowing the bridge kind of scenario where you couldn't communicate out to the field anymore. And then at least they wanted to call out to the field to tell the engineers how to go back to manual operations, but the adversary also did a denial of service against all the telephone lines. So this was an extremely complex series of events. Nothing's crazy. No zero-day exploits. The malware was amplification. It wasn't even the attack. The attack is just learning how to use the systems. But it was well rehearsed, and there was this small series of events together really disadvantaged the team there. What's also important to know is the media again covered it like, oh, it was a 6-hour power outage. It wasn't a big deal. First ever cyber attack take down power. It is a big deal, but it wasn't the 6 hours of power outage that got anybody in trouble. It was the fact that they had to go back to manual operations. They had to go back out in the field and manually switch electric gear, which is not safe. And in doing that, they had to continue doing that for over 9 months. So for over 9 months, they had no SCADA, no automation, no ability to control their power without being in the field and doing it. So what I've often said to our American audiences is it would be harder to take down a region of the electric grid in the United States. It just would be, based on a number of system development practices, not even security, just how we've actually built our grid. But keeping it down would actually be significantly easier because they didn't go to automation until the late 2000s, where we went way earlier. And that knowledge of doing manual operations at sites is getting a little salt and peppery and leaving the workforce. And we don't have the folks that actually know how to do that. And the folks that are coming in and trying to prep for it, and some utilities do prep for it and try to train for that, that's their site. not a multi-region event. We have a lot more coverage in our grid that doesn't allow us to do that. Of all the substations that were disconnected in the 2015 attack, so around 66 of them, around 67, one of them was done differently. And so when we wrote the public report and got it out to the community, Mike Asante and I highlighted to the White House and the National Security Council, this one difference is important. We're like, oh, well, why would it be important? Because if you have a successful, reliable attack, you don't just do something different for the heck of it. Like you're not like high-fiving on the ops floor and being like, I tried something new. You do the attack you know how to do. If they're doing one different, that's testing. That's future follow-on capability, and we should be analyzing what happened. I'm not so confident that anybody did, but we did highlight that. So 2016, December again, rolls around, and this time, the attack was very different. If you think about electric power, you have generation, think of it like your heart. You have transmission, think of it like your arteries. And you have distribution, think about it like your veins. Going after distribution is the soft underbelly that really makes a lot of people upset, but it's not turning out power to the country. Go after generation capability, or especially transmission capability, you can do a lot of damage across the country. This time, it was a transmission level substation. So 67-something distribution level substation in 2015, one transmission level substation in 2016. What effectively happened is where the adversary needed about 20-something people during the first attack, from the forensics we could show, there was about 20-something people involved in the attack. When it came time for the second attack, a different company, different location, the adversary had internalized and learned what they had done on the 2015 attack and moved it into software. So they wrote malware, which we called crash override, but they wrote malware that just did everything that they were trying to accomplish in 2015, but they actually did it off of that one different substation. So what they did on that one different substation that was different is, instead of trying to manually click through circuit breakers, they sent legitimate commands over legitimate protocols that the network was using to open up the breaker. It worked, and so our assessment is in 2016, they copied that, they turned it into software, and now you just have one person instead of 20-something needs to get onto a human-machine interface remotely, install the malware, and either execute it from the command line or set it to a timer, and it'll just go take off the electric equipment. No vulnerabilities, no exploits, no patches. No way to stop it. If it's in place, it works, because it's just native functionality of the system. An operator is supposed to be able to open up a breaker, so too could a legitimate communication go and be used illegitimately. This time, they sent it into kind of an infinite loop of open, keeping it open. So the operators tried to close the breaker and weren't able to. And that one transmission level substation had 3 times the power loss of all 67 combined in 2015. This story rarely gets talked about because it was only a 1-hour outage, and people were like, well, it's just one site compromised. Yeah, it's a transmission level site. That's crazy. And the crazy thing about crash override is it works anywhere. Because it's not using exploits and vulnerabilities, it's just using native functionality of the systems. You could drop crash override on any transmission system across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and it would work just fine. The US does use a different protocol. It would take less than 24 hours of changing over to that protocol to have this work here as well. Now, let's not get hyped up. You still got to put it in place. There's the whole two-phase kill chain. You still have to do the operation to get there. But if we're waiting for boom, as it were, that's not a great place to be in. And then your response practices can even amplify and make it worse. So Trisis. Trisis is one that really, really bothers me. I don't like when countries go after industrial infrastructure. Actually, one of the reasons I took a hard turn just to do industrial for my entire career is there is no gray area to me about industrial security. My time in the NSA showed me nuance and color. Well, why, and I'm not saying we ever did this, but why would you hack the Belgian telecom? Belgium is an ally. Well, it's not doing them any damage, and there's a lot of terrorism communications, and we could probably actually save a lot of lives doing this. There's a color of gray there of why would you actually accomplish this. In industrial security, what I love about it so much is there is no color of gray. Nobody needs to be in anybody else's industrial control systems. And I'll say this even as a prior military guy. Well, shouldn't the U.S. be able to go and take down a portion of the Iranian power grid to deny access to integrated air defense systems? No. You have other capabilities that don't impact the civilians. Go drop a bomb if you need to. Stay out of civilian industrial infrastructure. There's cascading effects that are too difficult to actually keep in check, that we don't know the capability of ever bringing that infrastructure back up, and the dependencies of hospitals and places around it that need that. And if we're going to be the good guys at the end of the day and want to have that capability, then we probably should respect that targeting civilians is just not okay. So why does TRISIS really tick me off? In the world of industrial security, you can drop a plant, you can steal intellectual property from the manufacturing lines, you can do a lot of stuff. And the deaths that might come are very second, third order effect and not likely, like not a given. But in some environments that are particularly dangerous, that we know they're unsafe environments, we have equipment that we design called Safety Instrument Systems, an SIS. And the engineering community does a fantastic job of putting these together, and they're custom. It might be the same controller, but the implementation is custom to each site that they put it in. Basically, the site, say a petrochemical site, goes through a process hazard analysis and says, okay, you're this level of unsafe, you need this type of safety system doing these things. And the only job of an SIS, the safety system, the only job, is if an attack happens, if a reliability issue happens, if anything happens, it's just going to shut down the plant in a safe way. So saying, hey, you want to do an attack, you want to have a reliability event that takes down the plant, fine, but let us do it in a safe way that doesn't kill people. If you bypass the safety system and you are able to do an attack in an environment without a safety system, you will likely kill people. It won't be second, third order effect. If it needed a safety system and you're going and mucking around that environment, you will likely kill people. So in 2017, actually in June 2017, a petrochemical environment in Saudi Arabia was attacked. At the time, the operators looked at their safety system and something was going wrong with it. And when a safety system has something that goes wrong with it, it drops, which means it does bring down the plant in a safe way. So it worked, but something had made it trip. Something had made it go down. So they called their vendor and was like, hey, engineering firm, this seems odd. What's going on? They're like, oh, it's probably a misconfiguration. Like, well, couldn't it be maybe one of those cyber attacks we constantly hear about? Nope, that's impossible. You can't do a cyber attack against the safety system, which we as a community always knew that you could, but that's the vendor's choice of words, that's fine. So they ruled it to be a maintenance issue, and they went back to normal operations using a safety system that had just been compromised. The adversary had made a mistake. The adversary was trying to remove the safety logic from that system. So again, if you attack a safety system, if you exploit it, if you drop it, whatever, too bad, it just brings the plant down. That sucks, you lose millions of dollars, but nobody dies. And that's a different order of effect. But if you can remove the safety logic from it, then it's up and working and everyone thinks that it's good, and you can do a follow-on attack to do something destructive. So anyways, the adversary knew they'd made a mistake. And so they went and tried to patch their code, TRISIS, and update it, and they came back a month later and tried to do a follow-on attack. And this time they did it against the 6 systems that was the full scope of the target. They fixed an error in their code. It was the wrong error though, so the safety system still dropped. This time it was obvious. Multiple safety systems going down around the plant. The operator's like, I don't care what the vendor says, this is a cyber attack. Publicly, so much information around this case is wrong. There's foreign policy piece about different security firms that are involved and stuff. It is inaccurate. The reality of the situation is that Saudi Aramco was not the one attacked. Saudi Aramco is the one that had incident responders that actually did the incident response to this environment. And they went in and found what was going on, and it also found that the adversary was pre-staging another capability to be able to do that follow-on attack. It is hard to get adversary intention, but in this case, it was very clear the adversary was intending to kill people at that site, and you would have had a fair amount of loss of life due to a cyber attack. That is offensive. That is outside the bounds of anything any of us would agree to being conflict or war or whatever you want to say. It violates every understanding of UN 2.4 and appropriate armed conflict. But that's the reality of where we are now. What Dragos' component of it, we didn't do the incident response. What our component of it was, is we were tracking the adversary. The adversary we call Xenotime, and we always made up names, it don't matter. It's just a clustering of intrusions to be a group. What concerned us is this wasn't an isolated event. We'd actually found that they had compromised multiple original equipment manufacturers in the industrial community. They had compromised multiple oil and gas companies, and they were starting to target electric utilities as well. Not only in Saudi Arabia, but multiple in North America and multiple in Europe. So right back again, we get thrown in front of National Security Council and the White House going like, hey, don't like to hype you guys up, but there's an actor who actually tried to kill people now operating on American soil. That's a different level than we're used to. You should probably take a look at this. And this is ongoing. And there's intrusions. I don't want to use the word attack here, but there are intrusions that are happening to today. And so what I want in kind of the practical level is I want you to be aware of the hype. I want you to be aware that a lot of time news gets it wrong on this stuff. It's not, and I don't like the fake news crap, I don't believe that. But on technical, nuanced discussion, it's difficult for a lot of journalists to really grasp what's going on in industrial because they hear from security experts that honestly are giving them bad information. Most of your IT security experts, no offense to anybody in the crowd, is not the person to talk about reversing the polarity on a piece of equipment. And so we hear about stuff all the time that's inaccurate. We had Wall Street Journal run another headline of, I think last year or 2 years ago, about Russians penetrating hundreds of utilities. Nope, it was 2. It's still bad, but we need to have a better approach to this and understanding of what's really going on. And I do like research, I do like facts. I agree that there's a lot of cool stuff happening over in the research community, but I don't want the research to get out ahead of the practitioner too much, okay? What I mean by that is the DEF CON or black hat talk about hacking Bluetooth to like spin up a wind turbine. I don't care. Until your threat model is Russians paratrooping into the wind farm, I don't care about the Bluetooth connectivity. Well, what about a password on a sticky note with the HMI? Do you have cameras? No? Then it's a physical security threat model. Don't blend in cyber and physical, because all you're going to do is piss off a bunch of engineers for something that's absolutely impossible from a security perspective. So we looked at the vulnerabilities. This is one I always hear about. Patch the vulnerabilities in industrial. Here's why we don't. To patch something can take years. First of all, an industrial equipment that has high uptime. But even if we wanted to sacrifice the profits of the industry and accomplish that, and just pretend they all work and never cause reliability issues, which they do, we released research that found 64% of every industrial control system vulnerability, every one of them, 64% of them reduced absolutely zero risk. They were just hacks that people were like, isn't this cool? Yeah, but it doesn't do anything. So if your patch policy in industrial is higher than 36%, you're wasting resources. We found that only 15% of them could even be used from an access perspective. And we further found, we didn't put it on the note slide here, we further found about 78% of them were wrong. Wrong hardware, wrong process, wrong vendor, wrong software. Chasing patches wouldn't have done it. So I'm going to speed up here a little bit. What I want people to understand is their levels of security of what they can accomplish. This is another model I wrote years ago. Don't worry about the offensive piece, that's more military, but on the back end of architecture, passive defense, and active defense. You're going to need a more reliable architecture where you reduce the attack surface. You're going to want to put tools in place because people don't scale that well. And so you're going to use the right tools based on the understandings and requirements of what you have in your architecture. And then if you're going to be going against human adversaries, you better have human defenders that are well-powered and trained, operating on good passive defenses and architecture. That's that active defense piece. And with that active defense, you can succeed against those state actors. So all I want you all to do from a practitioner standpoint is map the models together. Understand where you are today and where your gaps are across almost a protective, preventative kind of and response approach. So as an example, like I said, we're going to go pretty fast here, but this is just the slides captured at the end for the people that want to go a little bit more in depth. Map out each step of every industrial attack we see, especially the ones in your environments. If you see intrusions, map out each actual step and think about what you have today and what you'd propose to close the gap across architecture, passive defense, and active defense. Develop your controls based on what we're actually seeing. Do that against things like Xenotime, and then go and do it against all of the other threats that we're tracking. The industrial community today is tracking around 9 ongoing teams targeting industrial control environments. That's a lot in comparison to the previous years, but it's manageable. Go map those models together and apply those lessons learned there, and you will get an intelligence-driven defense. It won't be, here's where research might take us, which is still good. We need to be thinking ahead of the problem, but it's also covering down what we know to do today. If you're sitting in a board of directors at a power company and you're like, man, I really came up with this cool research with blockchain and AI to do something that nobody still knows how to use those to, no one's going to give you any credit when an exact copy of 2015 Ukraine rolls against your environment and the power goes down. Cover down what we know, then be forward-leaning. So take an intelligence-driven approach based off all these lessons we learned in the past 5 years, and you'll develop a good roadmap of what you need from security controls and mechanisms for your industrial environments. And for those of you, military and others, that are doing more of assessments, keep these as a guiding light about what the community is doing. There is no best practice and regulation and framework to follow, but we can complement what we've done over the years with that knowledge from what we're learning, and we'll be in a much better place. So, with all that, hope you learned something, hope you had fun. I appreciate your time today. I'll be around for a little bit in the back, exhausted time for questions. Maybe after the next speaker, I'll be out in the hallway, and then after that, I'll be out. So thanks so much, Huntsville, Alabama.